My name is Arlene Herson, and I am here at the studio of Lynn University on behalf of the Boca Raton Historical Society and Museum. The Historical Society was founded in 1972 to collect, preserve, and share the history of Greater Boca Raton. It manages two historic properties, Boca Raton Town Hall, the home of the Boca Raton History Museum, and the Boca Express Train Museum at the Florida East Coast Railway Depot. The Society has undertaken this project to document the history of Boca Raton's Jewish community. And today I am here with Rabbi Merle and Myra Singer. The Singers came to Boca Raton in 1978 when Rabbi Singer came to serve as the spiritual advisor at Temple Beth El, a position he held for 27 years until he retired in 2005. Temple Beth El was founded in 1967 and was Boca Raton's first Jewish house of worship. Both he and Myra were very, very involved with the growth of the temple and its outreach. Under Rabbi Singer's leadership, the congregation has grown to be the largest Jewish congregation south of Washington, D.C., serving more than 2,000 families. They are an amazing couple, and we are delighted to have them here today. So welcome, Rabbi Singer and Myra Singer.
Thank you.
We would like to know a little bit about you personally, because you have had such an impact on so many people here in the Boca Raton community. So first, I'd like to know, Rabbi Singer, where are you from?
I'm from Duluth, Minnesota, far north, upper northwest, right on the shores of Lake Superior. A small community, which actually helped me feel very much at home at Boca Raton when we arrived in 1967. They're also a small community.
Well, it was then.
Yes.
It's a big community now, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But Myra, where are you from?
I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Bigger city.
Ah, okay, Minnesota. So, but you didn't meet in Minnesota.
No, we met in
So
Ohio.
tell
Met
me
in
about it.
Cincinnati when Merle was a student at the Hebrew Union College.
Okay, now
And I was working there.
Okay, now a little bit more, because I understand that when you first met, Rabbi Singer was dating a friend of yours.
He was. And one day I stopped up to see my friend who was working in a department store, and he came at the same time to visit with her, and we met each other. And we had a common bond of loving Minnesota, missing it, and not being terribly happy in Cincinnati.
Well,
So we became friends.
We don't want people who live in Cincinnati to know that.
That's true.
You weren't happy, but other people love Cincinnati. But it is special because that's where you two kind of came together. But first as friends, 3 years, no date,
That's right.
no kiss.
No, friends, good friends.
So what happened?
Somehow the friendship blossomed into something else after 3 years.
Okay, so you, Myra, were determined not to marry a rabbi.
Absolutely.
Why?
I had grown up in my uncle, a rabbi's home, and while I loved them very much, it was it looked like they had to be there for the entire community, always in the public, and I didn't want that kind of life.
Well, but you have. However, you did mention to me, too, that the rabbis that you mentioned were all kind of stiff and not very much fun. Then you met this
That's right.
incredible man.
And he was very different.
Very
He was a
different,
lot of fun, and he was my best friend.
which is great.
So I forgave him for being a rabbi.
So Rabbi Singer, what made you decide to be a rabbi?
I think it had to do with the fact that I always wanted to be involved in community work and have an impact on people's personal lives. And I saw the rabbinate as a platform in which to become a change agent in whatever community I was part of. It was also, I think, a factor of the times. I was in school in the 1950s when they called this the dead generation. I remember being once interviewed by a college newspaper where they said, you're part of the dead generations. And I looked at them and thought that was a stupid statement. And I gave an equally stupid answer and said, no, I'm not dead, not dead yet.
But what did he mean by that?
They meant the 1950s was a generation that didn't have any long-term goals, I think. The 1960s was the years of the Vietnam War. In the 1960s, we became the time of cause. And by that time, I was a rabbi. in my first pulpit in Washington, D.C., with a man who was part of the social rights movement, social action movement, with Martin Luther King and others. And that, I purposely chose that as my first pulpit because I needed to be involved with what was happening in the community and in the world. And I was able to be. When I was in Washington, I was involved in the anti-war movement. I was involved in all the different marches. I was part of the youth leadership of our youth movement at that time. It was a time of great upheaval and change, and we felt that we were really in the epicenter of it in Washington.
True, and Washington, D.C. is a great place to be able to have influence on people and on the world, and to be involved in the project you were in, but you left there and you came to Boca Raton. So how did you wind up in Boca Raton?
Well, that's also an interesting story because I left Washington after 5 years, wanting to get out on my own and make my own impact, have my own impact. So I went to Philadelphia, where I was going to be rabbi of a congregation that was urban but suburban. However, between the time I interviewed and the time I accepted the job, the leading civil rights activist was shot to death on the school steps in the neighborhood, and it was white flight. So we, instead of being involved in community action, we spent time 7 years rebuilding the congregation, moving it into actual suburbia. And the congregation, which really had no right to continue to exist, is now one of the largest congregations and most influential in Philadelphia. So why did I leave and come here?
Right.
This goes back to 1977. As I indicated, I had been very involved in the youth movement early in my career. And one of the leaders of the national youth movement came to me and said, "Merle, why don't you interview with the people in Boca Raton?" Because he knew that I was ready to leave. And I looked at him in a straight face. I said, "Where's that?" I had no earthly idea where Boca Raton was. He says, "It's in Florida." I said, "Oh, heck, I'm too young to retire. I'm not interested." He said, "Just do me a favor, meet the people from Boca Raton who are here at this national convention." I said, "All right, you're asking me to do that, I can do that." I went up and I sat and I met with the leadership, and I came back so excited. The level of talent, the expertise, the community involvement back from where they moved was so intense and so expressive that I knew that this was going to be an opportunity for some great congregational work in life.
It's the truth.
And it did.
And it's a lot warmer. I know you mentioned that you were in Duluth. I think you referred to it in Minnesota as a frozen place to live.
Right.
So not only do we have you in this wonderful community, but the weather's pretty good here in Boca Raton too.
That's true. And people often would say that, "Did you move here for the weather?" And I honestly have to say, no.
Yeah.
I moved here for the community. And it was a time of community making and building when we arrived. And time was ripe, and we were fortunate to be in the right place at the right time.
You know, interesting. So you came here as the rabbi, which Myra meant you were the, how do I say it right?
What?
The Rebbitzin.
The Rebbitzin?
The Rebbitzin. Okay, thank you very much. So the Rebbitzin, the wife of the rabbi, you have certain duties. So what's it like to be the Rebbitzin?
I really didn't have any duties particularly. Merle and I always had an understanding that I would be or do whatever I wanted to be or do, and no particular obligations. He was the one that was hired to be the rabbi, and it was very comfortable that way.
Yeah, so when you say you wanted to be whatever you wanted to do, what did you want to do?
I worked.
As what?
I worked some as a psychiatric social worker, and then later I sold real estate. I entertained as I wanted to. We did a lot of that because we enjoyed having people over. And we always had people over for Shabbat dinner, and we always had speakers over. When you had interfaith weekends, we always enjoyed having people from the other congregations and the clergy. Those are the things that I would have wanted to do.
Right.
Anyway, but I felt no obligation particularly, and we lived quite a different life from how it had been in other generations because the community wasn't all around us, and our home didn't have to be open to everybody all the time.
Yeah, but you were both available for people, and certainly Rabbi Singer was.
No, sure. He was
you know,
probably one of the
available.
only clergy without an
Yeah.
unlisted phone number, because
Oh,
he felt
interesting.
that he
Yeah.
needed to be available if somebody needed him.
Okay, so you came to Boca Raton in 1978,
Yes.
and the Temple Bethel had just built this new building in 1977. So you were here in the very, very beginning of the growth of Temple Bethel. But before then, because we need to talk about what Boca Raton was like before you came. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Singer, you've done a video on the Jewish history of Boca Raton, which is an amazing video, and that will be available as part of this project. Now, in this video, I learned so much, and one of the things was when Boca Raton, I think in the 30s, and they were encouraging people to come here, and they ran ads about beautiful Boca Raton. We have beautiful beaches, we have beautiful homes, come see us, and then a big sign next to it, restricted. Jews were told not to come to Boca Raton. So when did that start to change?
I think that really began to change in the 70s. The temple was founded, interestingly enough, by a Catholic nun who was then president of Marymount College, which is the predecessor for Lynn University. There were a few Jews who were here. IBM had its plant. This was going to be the headquarters of IBM's personal computer. Well, the personal computer was designed and made here at IBM. And many of the engineers, or a number of the engineers, were Jewish who had come at that time. Sociologically, it was a fascinating time for Boca Raton and America itself. The 5 o'clock shadow that existed in the 30s and the 40s in America, separating the Jewish community from the non-Jewish community, and where the non-Jewish community largely felt that they did not want the ethnic community of the Jews intermixed with where they lived. So as Sally Ling in her book says, as Boca Raton was racially segregated, it was theologically segregated too, or that was the plan. But in the 1970s, after the 60s and after the Vietnam War, and the people began to realize that social inequities of the black-white, and religious inequities that existed was not going to be tolerated anymore. The people who wanted to maintain a pure Boca Raton, segregated Boca Raton, realized that times were changing, and either they change with the times or they leave. And I think the hardcore left and just moved further up the coast. And the people who remained here were welcome, ready to experience and explore a new relationship with the Jewish community. And that's what we walked into. So I walked into a community that was very, very accepting and warm and welcoming. In fact, one incident will probably tell the tale. I came here in '78, but in 1980, the congregation had grown to the size that we had to have 2 services for the High Holy Days. It was in the middle of my sermon in the first service on Kol Nidre night, the sacred night of the Jewish year. When I felt a tap on my shoulder, I turned around. It was the executive director with a finger like, come with me. Moved away from the microphone. He said he just received word from the Boca Raton Police Department that there was a bomb in our building set to go off in 5 minutes. So I just went back to the microphone and said the service is now over, and asked everybody, invited everybody to leave, which they all did very quickly and safely. The bomb was a hoax. Fortunately, the phone call was a hoax. But then what happened next was fascinating. We looked at ourselves, looked at what we're going to do now. We had a service coming in within an hour's time. There was not time to call it off for an hour and a half. We then looked across the street, and there was St. Joan of Arc. Within a matter of minutes, the pastor, there was Father Pusek, Ron Pusek, opened up the building, welcomed us in, and we had one of the most moving services of my rabbinic career.
Without prayer books.
Oh, interesting.
It showed the extent of spiritual understanding that existed in the community, particularly the next morning. Because the next morning, the newspaper carried a story of Father Pusek saying not in my community. An attack against the Jews, an attack against the Christians, and we will not allow it. So whoever is behind this, take word of it. This is not, Boca Raton is not a place for you. It's a place for us.
You know, interesting, but you used a word when you start to talk about this that's very, very scary. You talked about pure Boca Raton. And to me, that brings up so many other issues that fortunately don't exist here today. But even the fact that that was part of what the community wanted. Now, you have the end of that bomb story. It was a hoax. You were invited in by the pastor. That actually is a good ending. However, just last week right here in Boca Raton at the Chabad of East Boca, somebody broke in, picked up this big cement block with Rabbi New's name on it and broke the glass of the Chabad. The Chabad is also planning, hopefully, to build a synagogue on Palmetto Parkway. Sun Central did a story on it, and they've been receiving threats. We don't want you here. You know, leave. This happened this week. This is still going on here in Boca Raton. So how do you react to that?
Well, anti-Semitism is going to continue to exist wherever people live. It's fear of the stranger, fear of someone who is different, is inbred in people. It's something that we have to, as human beings, learn to overcome. And that means at times overcoming prejudicial views that we have that our way is the only way, whatever our way is, or our skin color, our culture, our relationship with the spiritual, with God, is the only way that is acceptable, and which is a problem that can then lead to prejudice, hatred, fear, fear of the stranger. So there are always going to be individuals who are going to seek to undermine and hurt the other. And it just means that we have to work that much harder in the spiritual community to improve the understanding that's available.
So personally, Myra, have you ever experienced anti-Semitism?
When I was a little kid in Minneapolis.
What happened?
There was a lot. I remember being stopped on the way home from school by people who asked, "Are you Jewish?" And my family had always said to me, you know, "Don't say you're Jewish."
Really?
Because they were afraid. Because
Really?
we used to walk back and forth, you know,
Yeah.
to lunch in those days by ourselves.
Yeah.
And it was kind of scary. In Minnesota, there was a lot of that. But I remember once when you had to educate a friend and a sports colleague of one of our sons who had defaced the building, actually. And you
With a
had him come in
swastika?
with swastikas, I think, and I forget what else was on it. It turned out to be a kid that our son played soccer with. And he came in with his parents because Merle asked him to do that rather than let the police punish him. And I guess you can tell the story better.
Well, what's interesting in that story is when he came in with his parents, he came in with a T-shirt that was obscene. It had obscene statements on it, not against Jews, but just was totally inappropriate. I insisted that he come back again, and this time I brought in a young woman who was herself a survivor of the Holocaust, and we together talked to him, and it was a community service. He had to learn to change his attitude, and we were not going to let him just get away with saying, "I'm sorry." His prejudice went deeper than that, and we're going to work at letting him know that respect for the Jew is respect for other human beings, or respect for any human being, requires a change in attitude, and that we're not going to tolerate this attitude. I wouldn't tolerate it in my own family, my own children. I'm not going to tolerate it in my son's friends as well.
A good message. You know, we're all people. I kind of find it so hard to relate to anti-Semitism. I grew up in New York City, so everybody was you know, Jewish or whatever. So I personally never experienced it. But Rabbi Singer, you told me once that also when you were in Minnesota, that a young woman approached you and accused you of being a Christ killer.
Yeah, I grew up in a neighborhood where there were more girls than guys, so we all palled together. And one day, we were playing together in this girl's yard, and her mother came out on the porch and looked at me and said, "What is he doing here? Get that Jew out of here!" And then the daughter chased me home, calling me a Christ killer. And I would say the hardest part for me was not being called a Christ killer, but being chased home by a girl. That was tougher
Wow.
than anything else.
But anyway, things for you guys. I mean, you came here as the rabbi and the rebbitzin, and with a certain amount of respect. So, and the Jewish community has grown so much. So what do you think the appeal is today of the Jewish community to come to Boca Raton? Because it's grown so much.
I'd like to answer that question, turning it a little bit. So not so much of what is the appeal, but what is the challenge? And the challenge today is apathy. You talked about growing up in New York, where everybody is Jewish and there's a deli on every corner, and Lisa, who needs a Jewish community? Who needs a synagogue? We came to Boca Raton where the only place you found your Jewish community, Jewish identity, was in the synagogue on a Friday night. And it was in many ways easier to be a rabbi then than it is now. Friday night, everybody came with their kids, and it was fun, it was great. And we were the epicenter for the entire area. Our catchment area went from Palm Beach down to Fort Lauderdale. We had members of our community. Today, why do I need to have a synagogue? Why do I need to have a community? I can be Jewish by being Jewish, whatever that means. I don't need to worry about anti-Semitism because I and my children are, and when I say I mean not only my generation, but my children's generation, so my children and grandchildren are welcome anywhere they wish to be. And anybody's home, they're comfortable. The barriers are not there anymore. So why continue to be Jewish? That's the tougher question.
Well, it's a tough question that everybody would answer differently. Mm-hmm. So that is a whole different subject. But how do you think the Jewish community in Boca Raton, based on the history of them not being welcome here, how do you think they're viewed today in Boca Raton, the Jewish community, in general?
I think the Jewish community in Boca Raton today is viewed with acceptance as it is most any place else in the United States. The only area where there is difficulty in relationship is in the area that we found in our community in North Carolina. We spent our summers in North Carolina. And one of our closest friends, or actually Myra is very, very close with the wife, is in religion, because they homeschool and they're taught that their approach to God is the only true approach. And when she said that to me, I said, well, that means that my way is false. And she couldn't really answer that. Though when she saw some of my videos on the Holocaust, she felt very, very moved and moved to tears. But there is a cultural barrier that only way we've been able to see it, Myra saw it more than I have, is when we get together as people, as wives, husbands, and parents. Then we can talk.
Interesting. So this person you're talking about obviously is not Jewish.
Right.
So let's talk about some of the programs that you have put together to bring the interfaith houses of worship together, because you have innovated some things that have brought together, as I mentioned, different religions to interact and maybe understand each other better. So tell me about some of those programs.
Well, one of the programs actually is a program that Myra does, is the Giving Tree, which for me, it gives me an opportunity to be Santa Claus on Christmas Eve. But maybe Myra should tell about the Giving Tree, and then I can tell you about the classes of theology, what we're doing that way.
Right, okay. Well, I was actually going to ask you about the Giving Tree later, because you started that, I believe, if I'm after Rabbi Singer retired. Is that true?
No, no.
Oh, this was going
It's
on
been going
forever.
for about 26
Okay.
years now.
So tell me, okay.
But there's
I'm
shared care, and there are other interfaith,
Okay.
there are interfaith weekends, and
Well, what? So explain.
the Giving Tree is a program where we take care of probably about 2,000 children and senior citizens for Christmas and Hanukkah. It's grown to include about 12 or 13 different agencies that bring people to us. We start in September getting wish lists from people about what they want, so that these children will really get what they want for the holiday, as our children do. And it's developed into a program that goes all year round, finding families in crisis and getting them what they need, from diapers to beds to clothing.
Interfaith?
Interfaith, absolutely. We have a couple of Jewish agencies that we work with, and the majority are open to everybody, as actually is Jewish Family Service as well.
Yeah.
So that we try to meet the needs of people who have kind of fallen through the cracks with the other agencies.
Yeah. Which is wonderful, to bring together. It's not just a Jewish issue of people needing things. It is an issue for all. And
right,
it's
and
great.
the people who help us are from all over the community. Jews, Christians, whoever wants to participate.
Great program.
It's sponsored by the temple, but it's out in the community so that many, many people who aren't part of the temple help, as well as the members of the temple.
Very important, very important. So, and your feeling about bringing together interfaith religions?
Very early on in coming to Boca Raton, I realized that we had the way was paved for either opening the door or living behind a closed door. And I decided that the mood of the community was ripe and ready for an open door policy. So we began first with the First Presbyterian Church on Camino Real with a pulpit exchange, and all of that expanded to St. Joan of Arc with a pulpit exchange. And it came to the point where after several years of pulpit exchanging, we said, enough talk. We really need to go beyond talk to action. And at that time, there was a member of the community, a former president of the temple, Harry Michelle, and his wife June, June was just very active in founding. She founded the May Volan Center. The May Volan Center for Elderly Center.
Oh, okay. I don't know what that center is. Wait.
It's
explain.
It's an interfaith center for it's not non-religious center to help for daycare for the elderly. And so June came with us and helped us with ideas. We were looking for some project that we could work on together. We came up with the concept of shared care, which would be 1 day a week, where we take people who need constant caretaking. We would the program would take care of the individual who needed the help, freeing the caretaker up to take care of his or her personal needs. And that program is still continuing to this day, and so it's probably it's close to its 30th year. And first began with First Presbyterian Church, then added St. Joan of Arc, and today it continues on. Actually, today it's going on right as we speak at the temple.
You know, there's so many things that you have created that have a lasting effect on the community, the Jewish community, and you mentioned the entire community. But you also did something very different. At Temple Bethel, you have, as part of the synagogue, you have a mausoleum. And you have said you've created a place where people can go from the cradle to the grave in one place. So, and you had to change a law to do that. So tell us about what you were thinking, that you have a mausoleum right on the grounds of Temple Bethel.
You know, that began as a dream probably shortly after I arrived in Boca Raton. I remember sitting in the parking lot, looking across the street at the cemetery, and kind of scratching my head and saying, you know, when I do a funeral, why do we have to travel a half hour to the Jewish cemetery? Why can't we have one on our own grounds? Since we city right contiguous to the city cemetery. And I began to look into that, a possibility. Ran into a little bit of problem from one individual in the community who was not very friendly to the Jewish community. But by and large, the city fathers, the city leaders, leadership in the community was very cooperative with me. However, the state law required us to, if you're going to have a mausoleum, the law required you to have 15 acres of ground dedicated only to cemetery and mausoleum burial or entombment. We sat on 10 acres, and obviously we didn't meet the requirements. So it just so happened that year I was invited by Suzanne Jacobs, who was a state representative, to Tallahassee to be the minister of the day, which meant you were there to give the opening prayer. And I began to think of, I'm going up to Tallahassee, what can I do while I'm there to help the synagogue and help the community? And at that point, one of our sons, that was pilot's license, I went up to the airplane with him and took pictures of the property, how we sit right next to the city cemetery, and I met with the head of the banking commission, which was the head of the cemetery division of the state, and I asked him in early morning hours that I met to give us a special exception to have a mausoleum on our property by our donating a couple acres of our property to the city so that we could build a mausoleum on it. He just looked at me and said, I'm not going to allow it. And take your pictures away. I'm not interested in helping you at all, period. Besides, the law is being sunsetted, which was, when I asked, what does that mean? He said, that means the law is going to be rewritten this term. So thanks to Suzanne Jacobs' help, we met with the head of the legislator that was writing the law, in charge of that, and I was able to have put wording into the law that would allow us and other churches and synagogues, if they could get city zoning, to have a mausoleum on their property. Sitting next to the city cemetery was very easy because for us to get zoning, because where we're located. So we were very fortunate to get the law changed and to give the permission to build a mausoleum. But then began the process of politicking our own congregation to say they wanted to do it, which became an interesting story in itself.
Well, obviously they agreed because I have been to services. I've been to services which are wonderful, and I have been to funeral services where you go directly from this beautiful temple, Bethel, and then everybody strolls to the mausoleum where you do another prayer. And you're right, so people don't have to go a half hour to a cemetery. Everything is done right there and done beautifully. However, there are many Jews that believe that you do not be buried in a mausoleum, that you must be buried underground.
Right.
So when you mentioned there were challenges within your congregation to do this, that was probably one of the issues. So how do you deal with that?
Well, we've dealt with it very directly in that the original burial in Israel, when it was Canaan, in biblical times and post-biblical times, was cave burial. It was not underground burial. That came later, when our people moved out of Canaan, out of the Promised Land. So what it was is the people were put in a sarcophagi, and then their bones were then placed in the cave. So what I'm saying is that the mausoleum is an artificial cave. It's filled with natural cement, is sand and water and whatever else goes into making cement. And so what we've done, we've created a cave, but that is out of modern material. So in some ways we've gone back to the original state of burial, though I have to acknowledge that it does not follow the letter of Jewish law. And though in building the mausoleum we followed it as close as we could, because the idea of having a cemetery on synagogue grounds was very common in Europe. I've visited several synagogues where there are cemeteries to this day. So we follow that part of halakha Jewish law. but the spirit of the law is for us is observed, but not by traditional conservative Orthodox Jews, and I respect that.
Okay, interesting. I've never thought of it as a cave before, and how you know, you talk about going back way with the way Jews were born. So you mentioned Orthodox. So for people, your Temple Beth El is Reformed. So just give us in a nutshell the difference between Jewish religion of Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox.
Okay. Let me use the experience at Mount Sinai, Moses at Mount Sinai, as the paradigm for the differences. Orthodox believe that Moses received the laws, the Jewish law, from God on Mount Sinai, and that God literally transmitted this information through Moses, but it did not involve any of Moses' human faculties and frailties. So the law, letter for letter, word for word, is divine, which means the Bible, the Torah, so the 600, not just the 10, but 613 laws that are mitzvot that are listed in the Torah are literally from God and must be observed as best as humanly possible. At least as explained in the official guidebooks, the Talmud, in Jewish history and Jewish tradition. That's orthodoxy. Conservative Judaism sees God God on Mount Sinai giving this to Moses. Moses writing it down. Now, as a human being, some of the laws are written down to be as God said them. Some are as Moses interpreted them. So there's room for, in conservative Judaism, there's room to interpret the law and modify it. And to go to Reform, Reform says it was not just given to Moses at Mount Sinai, but the law is given historically through the generations of our people, and it is up to us to individually and community-wise subject the law to our understanding, and then be free to choose how to observe the spirit, if not the letter of the law. So that in a nutshell is Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform.
Okay, I got it. And you know what? I'm still confused. But however, on a lighter note, so let's talk about, you know, you're the spiritual leader, you're the mentor, you're a teacher. So you teach in the Sunday school. I know you've taught at FAU. But also in the Sunday school at Temple Beth El, you teach or taught sex education. And your son was in one of the classes. And I understand very embarrassed. So how did you lose a lot of privacy when you are a rabbi and the rabbi's wife? You're a very public person, and here you are teaching sex education, and your son's there. So, how did you deal with that?
Well, let me start off with that, and Myra probably can pick up on it better than I can. Why I put that into the curriculum of the confirmation class? Actually, I and my educator Robin Eisenberg did that. Because at that point in the schools, very little was being done in the area of sex education. At least not soon enough. And so even at age 15, the schools were holding back what can be taught. In fact, some of the traditional Christian religious community was part of the problem at that point. So we put it into the confirmation curriculum, and I worked with Planned Parenthood, and Planned Parenthood actually helped guide and direct me in this education program. But our sons it was difficult for the sons to be in the classes that have their father as a rabbi teaching this.
Right. You know, when you mention your sons, I want to backtrack for a minute, because when you have 4 sons
Correct.
and a lot of grandchildren, but you had 4 children, 4 sons, in 5.5 years. Mm-hmm. So, Myra, how did you deal with that?
We felt so lucky.
Oh, interesting.
We felt
so where were the boys born?
2 of them were born in the Washington, D.C. area, and 2 in the Philadelphia area.
So when you came to Boca Raton, young
4.
rabbi family, you had 4 children.
Right.
Okay, and you seem to make it so easy. 4 children, 5.5 years?
It was very noisy.
Okay? Noisy is the only way you would say, well, you are a remarkable woman. I've said that before, but and you have 4 remarkable sons, all doing well. And Essa, how many grandchildren? I think
10.
10. Wow. Okay, so your children have made a big impact on your life. I know you for them, aside from sex education. So I mentioned losing privacy. Has that affected you as a rabbi and rabbi's wife here in Boca Raton?
I have not personally felt it. So much philosophy. My approach to the rabbinate has been one of sharing openly, freely, all of my life, my strengths, my weaknesses, and what we do as a family has been important to me, and has become important to the congregation. It was when the boys were growing up, and they would say to me, particularly when they were in college, "Dad, we want you to be at parents' weekend." And if I had a bar mitzvah or something special going on, I generally would go to the family and say, "My son has asked me to be with him this weekend," and I'm saying yes. And I would do that with the idea of setting myself up as a model for what they should do when their children are at college. That your family comes first. You know, there are times when your family can't come first, and there's a death, and we've had family trips and vacations that had to be postponed. But fortunately, it's been rare, and though significant.
Though our kids have reacted to that.
Yeah.
Recently, there was a situation where one of our sons had to postpone a trip for his family because of work. And he said...
And his work is what?
He travels overseas buying and selling companies. He does global business development. And he was going to take his children to Chicago, and instead he needed to be in Taiwan the next day. And he said to us, he never wanted to become that person that had to postpone things that were important to the family, like his father had to a few times. And it was a painful time, you know, for us thinking about it, and for him facing the reality that life isn't always the way you want it to be.
Interesting.
And
you know,
sometimes you have to have, you know, give disappointments.
Right. As you grow up, and as, although none of us are getting older, but as you get a little bit older, you realize some of the things that you learned way back that you didn't understand. You understand today. So, Rabbi, you know, being the spiritual leader, being a rabbi, having an influence on so many people, what has been the most rewarding for you?
I guess the most rewarding would be people who come up to me today and remind me of things that I said to them that had a significant impact on their life, and help them through a difficult time. To me, interesting enough, almost every time this happens, I do recall the incident in the moment. And it was a moment, for me at that time, it was a moment like any other moment. It was not something that was significant. It was something I expected. I would expect any rabbi to do, and to respond to the individual's request, and to find out today that what I did and said then had a lasting effect on their life. Gives me an opportunity to say it's been great being a rabbi.
And as a rabbi, what's the most difficult?
Most difficult is probably the politics of the rabbinate, which fortunately and unfortunately, I find my Christian colleagues have the same situation. So it's, in that way we're no different than any other religious group. But it's the toxic personality that you have to deal with that needs to turn every situation into a contest, and feel that their way is to be the way that has to come out on top. And honestly speaking, I'm really not a confrontive personality. Some people like the challenge of a fight. I don't. So what I've done is I make sure before I go into a board meeting I have many allies. So there are times that I may not even have to speak up, but the job gets done.
And you have people in your corner. So have you ever doubted your faith?
Doubted my faith?
Mm-hmm.
Belief in God?
Right. Well,
the answer is absolutely yes.
Mm-hmm.
When I was ordained, it was the time of the death of God theology in the 1960s. And the president of the college at that time was Nelson Glick of blessed memory. And he was very upset that one of his graduates, Sherwin Wine in Birmingham, Michigan, was in Time magazine denying the belief in God. And so he threatened at the time of our ordination to ask each of us if we believed in God, which is something that is not part of Jewish practice. We, as a class, all agreed that if he asked the question, we were going to say no. And at that time, I honestly had very serious theological questions and doubts. And as I like to tell the story, he never asked the question, thank God, and we never had to answer it. But when I started out in the rabbinate, I would say I was not necessarily a non-believer, but with Judaism there's a term called the epikoros, the doubter, the serious doubter. And in Judaism, the serious doubter is given a place of honor and respect. Because in Judaism there is no requirement, like Christianity, to believe in God. In fact, the rabbis, the tradition goes so far that in the Talmud they wrote in a dialogue with God where God says to the people, "Would that my people not believe in me but follow my commandments." So as a Jew, it's more important to do the commandments as much as you can to identify as a Jew, practice Judaism, and be involved in social change and commitment and action. That's more important than what you believe.
Interesting. So obviously, as far, and you've had such an influence on people who believe not only in their faith, in their religion, and being Jewish, have faith in you. Now, in 2005, after 27 years of being the spiritual leader, the rabbi of Temple Beth El, you decided to retire. Why?
Well, that actually was a decision made many years earlier. I said that I wanted to retire at age 65, and if I was dumb enough that it would be mandatory retirement at age 70. I worked into I have a life contract with the synagogue. But before I go ahead with that, when you're talking about belief, let me jump back for a minute. One of our sons, actually, is the son Myra was talking about earlier. At her final rehearsal for his bar mitzvah, about a week right before his bar mitzvah, he and I were practicing and preparing him in the synagogue, and he just broke down in tears and said, "Dad, I emotional thinking about it. I can't go ahead with this. I can't celebrate my bar mitzvah." I looked at him and I said, "Why?" I mean, you're well prepared and couldn't see any obstacle. He said, "Dad, I don't believe in God." So I said, "Great, tell the congregation. Probably half of them don't believe too. So share it." He said, "I can't." I said, "Yes." And he did. And it was a beautiful ceremony. So the idea of not believing in God was something that the questioning of God is something that was important even in our children's life. But back to retirement. I wanted to be able to retire young enough that I had the energy to and the health to follow other pursuits. I often kiddingly say this, but it was true. When I graduated high school, my dream was to pack a suitcase and hitchhike my way across to Los Angeles and hang out in Hollywood and just do something. And but of course, when my mother, especially when my mother got wind of that, said, no, you do whatever you want, but you're going to get a degree first. So I went east and became a rabbi, and now in retirement I can follow my dream of photography and videography and filmmaking.
And you're doing so much of that now, but there was this total change. So you retired in 2005 as a healthy person to pursue all of your interests. And then a year later, it was like an incredible experience when you were skiing and you found out, which we know about now, that you're so vital, but you have Parkinson's. Mm-hmm. So how did how did that affect you? How did you find out? What's your...
Actually, we found out about the Parkinson's the year of retirement. That is my successor, who we're very close with. He worked with me when he was for 5 years prior to actually about almost 10 years before he came in to succeed me. So he saw me under how I was before Parkinson's had really affected me. And as he likes to describe it, it was like there was the Merle that he knew and respected was there inside me, but it was like a veil had come over, and I wasn't able to. I had a struggle to get that Merle out, which is still there. That struggle is still there. It's been tough. It's a disease that never stops taking, or as Michael Fox sometimes says, it never stops giving you new challenges. But I have one advantage in dealing with this disease. I have lifelong dyslexia, severe dyslexia. And in fact, I was told in 7th grade I'd be lucky if I graduated high school. And I just refused to accept that as a limit. And I guess that's my attitude to how I deal with Parkinson's.
You know, it's so interesting because in Myra, and you were part of this and you've seen the change in Rabbi Singer, but dyslexia, as you mentioned, in the 7th grade, I mean, you said you had such a difficulty going through school. You knew you had to work so much harder than anybody else. Mm-hmm. Your teachers didn't have faith in you, said, hey, you're never going to amount to anything. I mean, the fact that you were able to persevere, you've done videos, and I recommend anybody out there that has a computer to go on YouTube. You have some amazing videos. One from dyslexia to Parkinson's, where you talk about how they related and how you overcame it. Then the most recent one is a video on your Parkinson's, how you how you really saw changes in your body. I understand that this video is part of a film festival, hopefully will win. You have so many videos. I recommend everybody out there, go on YouTube, learn more, and we're going to learn some more here today, but it's so fascinating that when you discovered you had Parkinson's, you retired, yet you're doing so much now. Tell me, in overcoming Parkinson's, and that's probably not the right word, but I understand you're taking ballet classes?
Oh yeah, there's a great program called Boca Raton Ballet Theater for Parkinson's disease. And we actually go through all the different movements and exercises that any ballet person, ballerina, would go through. It's in the class, there are people who are in wheelchair, people who are disabled to a greater degree than I am, to people who are my level. And we all are there to help and to move and to flow with the music and exercise. If there's one thing that is known about Parkinson's is that the way that you can successfully deal with it is through exercise. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't do it to the degree I should. Then I get it from Myra. But exercise is probably the one thing that we need to do.
Interesting, but in the ballet class you don't need a tutu, so you're okay with that.
Yeah.
But I understand the two of you talk about, Myra's influence. You take Tai Chi together twice a week? Myra?
Yes. It's a program that just ended, and hopefully we'll pick it up again soon. But again, it's exercise, it's movement, it's good for everybody, and helps us both with balance. And it's fun.
Yeah.
It's a lot of fun. But about his retirement and the Parkinson's, part of the problem with Parkinson's is that it usually takes a year or two till you're diagnosed. In that time, weird things are happening and nobody understands them. And for us, we kind of thought it was the retirement, because that would certainly be enough to make anybody depressed or make anybody have a little difficulty with decisions maybe, or whatever, all the funny things that were going on that turned out to be Parkinson's. But we thought it was all about the retirement. And, and it was a tough time.
That suddenly here you are, the spiritual leader, the rabbi, and all the influence on people, that suddenly you're home.
And he couldn't function as well as he had.
So what were the
didn't
first
know
symptoms?
why.
I mean, how did you be diagnosed when you say it takes a year sometimes?
It takes a long time.
So what were these symptoms? How did you discover? What did your body tell you?
Well, the first thing was actually my internist saw it before I did, and before I wanted even to know it. The called the Parkinsonian mask. Your face is not as expressive as it used to be, and as it should normally be. And he saw this, and I was not interested in hearing about it, because I said, from what I understand, that the cure is worse than the disease, which is totally wrong. What happened is my sense of my voice became softer. And I've always taken great pride in having a voice that I could handle any auditorium or any room, and that suddenly was limited. My handwriting, which has never been great, when I got to the point where I had trouble reading what I wrote, I knew that there was a serious problem here. And so we finally found a neurologist, movement disorder expert to diagnose this, and here we are.
Here we are, but you know, you're living your life a different way now, but you're doing so many important things. I mean, I mentioned the videos. I think sharing your dyslexia and your Parkinson's and showing what a vital man you are is so important. But just 1 minute back to the dyslexia, because here you were, you told you wouldn't, you know, graduate, maybe not even graduate high school, and went on to do all of the terrific things that you were doing. But is it true that Myra, that you discovered the dyslexia, that the rabbi really didn't know what the problem was?
Yeah, nobody understood much about dyslexia as he was growing up. But when we started dating, I was a psychiatric social worker in a very large department of psychiatry in Cincinnati. And when we would be with my friends, they were mostly social workers, psychiatrists, psychologists, and these were the kinds of things we were interested in. And we kind of began to take a look at what he was experiencing and gave it a name, because we understood that. We were working with people with dyslexia. And he began to think, well, maybe that's what was wrong with him. And the more he thought about it and looked at it and later got some help with it, the better he felt, because he knew he wasn't dumb.
Yeah, but it happened so much later. You got through high school.
Much later.
You're in the seminary. You're doing all this stuff. You're overcoming it. You have no idea when you're looking at a piece of paper that it's jumbled up, or what are the signs of dyslexia?
Well, the problem with dyslexia is that when I look at a written word, my eye will go to either the middle of, if it's a multisyllabic word, to the middle of the word, or go to the end and then go backwards. And I am not even aware of this going on. In the milliseconds that it takes place, you already have absorbed the word and are moving on. I'm still in a moment of trying to place the word, the pronunciation, to identify that word. So it's a process that is there, and that you can learn to compensate for today, but it's part of your life. You can't. You just have to acknowledge it, live, and adjust. Fortunately, I come from a family background where failure is not acceptable, and I remember very vividly the teacher, 7th grade teacher, kept saying to me, "You're not going to graduate high school. Where are you going to go?" And I just kept saying, "I'm going to college." She finally gave up and said, "Go talk to the guidance counselor." And he said that was a fascinating meeting, because he said to me, he said, Merle, you did not do well on this test. Your teacher is absolutely right. The aptitude does not show you to have aptitude to go ahead in an academic environment. However, your kindergarten test showed the extreme possibility and potential. You know, kindergarten is a pre-reading test, but they didn't even know. And he said, so the result was, he said, you know, you can have great goals and great purpose. You may not, you may or may not achieve it, but go for it. And I remember walking home that day and then saying to myself, well, Merle, you can hitch your wagon to a star, and if you don't catch a star, at least you're going to learn to fly. And damn it, I'm going to go for it. And and that worked until actually my first semester. I was a sophomore in college, and I transferred to the University of Cincinnati and was minoring in rabbinics because my Hebrew was almost zero. And I was minoring in rabbinics, living in the dormitory of the Hebrew Union College, and majoring in sociology at the University of Cincinnati. We had to take French, and I had to take Hebrew. French I learned somehow or another, and I passed. Hebrew I failed cold. And I remember going to the provost, Rabbi Samuel, blessed memory, and he said to me, he said, in a southern accent, he said, Merle, you just go home and you study all summer long, and you come back, you pass the test, and you'll be fine. And that was the days when we used to take the train. So I went down to the train station the next day to go home to Minnesota. I remember going out on the platform, it was at dawn, and looking and have tears in my eyes, thinking to myself, well, I may never see this sight again. And I told myself the story of the rabbinic teacher who was a shepherd, and he saw that the water at a stream, waterfall, was being hollowing out a rock. And he said, if water can hollow out a rock, knowledge can enter my brain. He went on to be a great scholar. I said, damn it, I'm going to do it. Yeah. And I just went back and studied, and I said, I don't care what I have to do. I'm going to get this degree. I'm going to get this piece of paper. Whatever I do with it, I don't know. But in fact, at one time I thought I was going to go into professional camping and own and run a camp. I love camping. So Myra. I said I don't care whatever it takes. I'm going to do it.
Amazing. You know, and if anybody can, you can. I mean, I know that in the video, again, I recommend the video about discovering you had Parkinson's, and you mentioned you were on a ski slope and your legs just weren't doing what they wanted to do. And then I found out that you are going someplace with your children soon, and that you may take up skiing again with an instructor.
Tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow I leave. To go up to New York to go skiing with my youngest son and my grandchildren, which is I'm nervous about it, but I'll give it a try and with a little bit of help.
Well, there's no question that you're going to conquer whatever you set out to do. You are both so amazing. Learning about you has actually enhanced my life in some ways. Has given me the inspiration for you to do what you do with the disability, and Myra, for you to be together, for the life you have together. You're both an inspiration and remarkable people, and we could talk for hours, but now I know that you have family to go to, and it has been such a pleasure having both of you here as a guest and learning about not just Jewish history, but about the two of you. And I thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you to Lynn University for giving us the opportunity to be here in the studio and to be able to share our story.
I totally agree, and we all thank Lynn University. This is a wonderful studio, for being able to use the studio here and for you to share the stories. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that you have enjoyed getting to know Rabbi and Myra Singer and learn a little bit about the Jewish history and certainly a lot about them. So, good night.